I had chased this picture in my mind for as long as I can remember. A small wooden cabin planted right beside calm water, tall trees wrapping it in green silence, only birds daring to break the hush. Every time city sirens whined or neighbors slammed doors, I closed my eyes and retreated to that dream. I could almost smell wet earth and fresh pine sap, could almost feel the cool breeze dancing on the river's skin. So I worked overtime shifts, skipped vacations, traded dinners out for instant noodles, all to stack a down payment big enough to buy that silence. The day the listing popped up, I thought it was a prank. 45 acres with river frontage, unzoned, no HOA listed, priced lower than junk lots closer to town. I read the line, private access to watercourse, 3 times before breathing again. A shaky phone call, a frantic drive, and there I was, tires crackling on gravel, the world suddenly wide open in front of me. The land had been ignored for years. Grass knee-high, a few fallen logs, the river making gentle music only I seemed to hear. I remember bending to scoop a handful of that water, letting it drip through my fingers like proof. That cold splash told me, this is real, this is yours if you dare. Closing took weeks, each signature a small victory. I framed the deed like art and leaned it against my apartment wall, studying the survey lines every night, memorizing the strange curves where the river snaked through the parcel. I loved those curves. They whispered promise and adventure. The moment the funds cleared, I boxed up my life in the city and drove toward freedom with an overstuffed truck, heart drumming faster than the wheels on asphalt. On the first dawn out there, fog floated above the river like slow ghosts. I brewed coffee on a rusty camp stove, steam rising to meet the mist. My tools lay in neat rows, a second-hand chainsaw, a hammer with a scarred handle, a stack of 2x4s that smelled like a forest after rain. I was nervous, sure. Building a cabin alone is bold or foolish, depending on who you ask. But each nail I drove felt like an answer to years of restless nights. Thunk, 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 those sounds stitched my dream to wooden soil. 3 days in, the frame stood chest-high, proud and skeletal. I paused to admire the way morning light slipped between the studs. That's when I heard tires crunch up the old path. A black SUV, shiny and out of place among the weeds, rolled to a stop. The window slid down and a woman in oversized sunglasses leaned out, lips pinched as if tasting something sour. "What are you doing here?" she asked, words sharp enough to cut wire. "Building my cabin," I said, brushing sawdust from my shirt. "This is common property for Lakeside Harmony HOA," she snapped. "No private cabins allowed." My stomach flipped. HOA. My paperwork said nothing about one. I pulled the deed from my back pocket. Yes, I carried it like a security blanket, and held it out. "I own this land," I replied, voice steady though my pulse jumped. "The river and both banks fall inside the boundary." She didn't even glance at the paper. "You'll be hearing from us," she warned, engine revving as she reversed and sped away, spraying gravel. The sound lingered like an insult. I spent the next hour rereading every line of my documents under the shade of a maple tree, searching for hidden clauses. Nothing. No HOA. No easements beyond a utility pole near the road. Relief washed over me, but unease clung like cobwebs. I reminded myself that people make mistakes. Maybe she had wrong info. Maybe she would check and apologize. I hammered on, sun climbing overhead, sweat mixing with the scent of fresh-cut lumber. That night, a whippoorwill sang me to sleep. Yet at dawn, voices broke the quiet. I stepped outside my tent to find 2 men tramping through the grass toward me. One carried a clipboard, the other a phone filming everything. "Need you to stop construction," clipboard man said without greeting. "You're violating HOA covenants." I showed the deed again. They barely looked, arguing that the community park extends to the riverbank. I pointed to survey stakes clearly marking my line. The filming phone hovered inches from my face, catching every heartbeat. My hands curled, not in anger but in a desperate grip on patience. If they wanted a scene, I refused to give it. Calm words, slow breathing. But inside, worry simmered. Was there some hidden rule? Could paperwork lie? They left promising further action. My cabin frame loomed behind me, suddenly fragile. Wind rattled loose plastic sheeting, sounding like distant applause or distant threat. I couldn't decide. I tried to work, but every crack of a twig had me looking over my shoulder. Late afternoon brought an empty horizon and a painted sky, yet tension held my muscles tight. I almost welcomed the quiet knock of rain that night, hoping it would wash this nonsense away. 2 mornings later, a cruiser's blue lights flickered through the trees before the sun burned off dew. My heart felt too big for my chest as 2 officers stepped out. They wore neutral expressions, one carrying a notepad, the other scanning the skeletal cabin with a curious tilt of his head. They introduced themselves politely, explained they'd received a complaint of illegal construction and trespassing. My mouth tasted metallic, but my voice stayed steady. "I've got proof," I said, handing over the deed, so familiar now the edges curled. The younger officer held the document under the early light, tracing the property lines with his finger. His brow rose. "You own the river corridor too?" "Yes," I said, trying not to sound defensive. "From the north bend to the old stone culvert. It's all in there." He whistled, low and surprised. The other officer glanced at his partner, shrugged, and began jotting notes. They asked a few routine questions, where my septic would go, whether I planned a permanent foundation. Nothing aggressive, just procedure. Their calm contrasted sharply with the anger of the HOA visitors. A strange hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe the law would settle this. Yet even as the officers radioed dispatch to confirm the records, unease lingered. What if the HOA pushed harder? What if paperwork got lost in bureaucratic cracks? I watched the river flow behind them, constant and unbothered, and clung to that motion as a reminder. This water, these banks, they're mine to protect. In the end, the officers thanked me for my cooperation, promised to file a report, and drove away, leaving tire tracks glistening with morning frost. I stood alone again, the cabin frame casting long shadows like skeletal fingers trying to grab back the night. Somewhere beyond the trees, someone was already dialing another number, drafting another letter, planning another ambush. I felt it as surely as I felt the river's current tugging at the world's edges. But I also felt resolve rise like the sun behind me. The dream hadn't faded. It stood right there in boards and nails, in the wild call of a distant loon, in the quiet promise of water sliding over stones. Trouble had shown its face, yet the cabin's doorway still framed a piece of sky that belonged only to me. And that sky, that slice of endless blue, dared anyone to try and take it away again. I didn't sleep that night. Even though the officers had left without arresting me or shutting down the build, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from over. I kept picturing that woman's face, the way she stared through me like I didn't belong. As if my dream meant nothing compared to her sense of control. Her threat wasn't just about rules or property lines. It felt personal. Early morning mist hovered over the river again, peaceful and undisturbed, but something about it felt different now. Like I was no longer alone here. Like eyes were watching from behind the tree line. I told myself not to be paranoid, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. I spent the next 2 days working on the cabin walls. I needed to keep going, needed something to focus on other than what-ifs and phone calls I hadn't heard yet. But even as I hammered, my ears were tuned for engines, voices, or worse. And sure enough, trouble returned. I was measuring window placements when I heard footsteps again. Not the crunch of boots like last time, these were quieter, calculated. I turned and saw 2 people standing just outside my property line. A man and a woman, both dressed sharply, holding folders in their arms. The man waved as if we were old friends. I didn't wave back. He introduced himself as a representative of the HOA. "We're just here to have a civil conversation," he said, smiling the kind of smile that hides teeth. The woman stood silent, flipping open her folder. I didn't say anything, just waited. "We've reviewed the area," he began. "And it seems there's been a misunderstanding. This land, particularly the portion near the water, has long been used by Lakeside Harmony residents as a community space. Trails, river access, picnics, shared enjoyment." I nodded slowly. That might be true. But I bought this land. Legally. The river section included. He raised a brow, clearly trying to stay polite. Yes, and we've seen your deed. But you have to understand, the residents consider this land part of their lifestyle. It's been that way for decades. People have weddings by that river. Kids learn to fish here. His tone had shifted. It was soft, but beneath it was pressure. Guilt. As if I should be ashamed for taking away something they never truly owned. I looked him in the eye. I understand the memories. But I didn't take anything. I bought this land fair and legal. Your traditions don't change that. The woman finally spoke, her voice cold and clipped. We're prepared to offer you a buyout. Double what you paid. That stopped me. For a second, I imagined the numbers. I could walk away with a good profit, go buy land elsewhere, avoid the fight. But that thought passed just as fast. This place wasn't just an investment. It was peace. It was mine. I'm not selling, I said quietly. They didn't argue. Didn't raise their voices. Just nodded, turned, and walked away. But their calm scared me more than their threats. Because calm meant planning. Calm meant they weren't done. And I was right. 3 days later, I was standing by the river, watching the light hit the water, when I saw something that made my chest tighten. No trespassing, HOA property signs nailed to trees lining the riverbank. My riverbank. I stormed over, ripped the signs down, and marched back to the cabin to call the sheriff. This time, I wasn't waiting to be harassed. I was drawing my own line. A deputy arrived 2 hours later. A young guy, friendly enough, listened carefully while I showed him the new signs and explained everything. I had the survey ready, the deed, even screenshots from when I purchased the property. He nodded, took notes, said he'd report it. But he also added, you might want to talk to a lawyer. These HOA people, they don't always go quietly. He was right again. Within the week, I received a certified letter. It was thick and formal, from the HOA's law firm. It accused me of damaging community property, violating environmental restrictions, and, my favorite, acting in defiance of neighborhood values. The anger I felt reading that was like fire in my throat. Neighborhood values? What values? I didn't even live in their neighborhood. I had no mailbox, no streetlight, no trash pickup. Just trees, dirt, and water I paid for. The hypocrisy made my blood boil. Still, I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I hired a property attorney. He was older, slow-talking, but sharp as a blade. He reviewed everything, called me after 2 days, and said, you're in the clear. The land's yours. Every inch. The river too. And their signs. That's trespassing. We can file charges. Hearing those words felt like oxygen after days underwater. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I had been right all along. But the HOA didn't back down. They doubled the letters. They called in inspectors. Claimed I was damaging a wetland, violating building codes, putting up an unapproved structure. I had to explain to officials over and over that my build was within county rules. No plumbing yet. No electricity. Just a cabin, simple and sound. Still, the visits kept coming. It wore me down. There were days I'd sit on a tree stump, head in my hands, wondering if it was worth it. I had come here for peace and solitude, but all I felt was tension. Anxiety. I started hearing cars at night that weren't there. Jumping at twigs snapping in the woods. Always waiting for another knock, another notice, another accusation. But then I'd walk down to the river. The water didn't care about court filings or board meetings. It flowed just the same. Clean, cool, full of life. It reminded me why I was fighting. Why this place mattered. This wasn't just land. It was healing. It was space to breathe. And no one, not even a whole HOA, was going to take that from me. A few weeks later, everything shifted. My attorney filed a cease and desist against the HOA. He also filed a formal complaint with the county about the false signs, the harassment, the unauthorized contact. The sheriff's office finally started paying attention. The real twist came when a county records agent confirmed something remarkable. The HOA had never held any legitimate claim to the river area. The common space they believed in? It was a myth. Someone had misread old boundaries decades ago. 4 years, they just used the river assuming it was theirs. No one had ever challenged it. Until I came along. When I found out, I felt a strange mix of triumph and disbelief. All their noise, all their threats, all that pressure, based on nothing. A rumor. A fantasy that had never been questioned. But reality had caught up. Still, even with proof on my side, the HOA didn't apologize. They just got quiet. No more visitors. No more letters. No more signs. The silence was heavier now, loaded with tension, but I welcomed it. At least it gave me space to work again. I went back to building. Each board I nailed down felt more solid than the last. I added a roof. A small front porch. Carved my initials into a beam and smiled. I began clearing a short trail to the riverbank, where I planned to build a tiny dock, just enough for a chair and a fishing rod. I imagined sitting there at dusk, the water glistening gold, the woods full of soft summer sounds. The cabin was small, but every inch meant something. I didn't need luxury. I just needed this, a place no one could bully me out of, no HOA could control, no neighbor could claim. One afternoon, as I was fixing the window frame, a figure appeared on the trail. My chest tightened instinctively. But this time, it wasn't a board member. It was an older man in jeans and a faded ball cap. He raised a hand, waited at the edge of the trees. I approached cautiously. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said kindly. "I live on the far side, over by the old red barn. Just heard all the noise these past few weeks." I nodded. Waited. "I just wanted to say," he paused, "some of us out here aren't with the HOA. And we're glad you stood your ground. That river never belonged to them, and folks have always known it. No one wanted to deal with the headache." His words hit me like a wave. It was the first time someone had acknowledged the fight. The first time anyone around here offered support. He left after a few minutes, and I stood there in the clearing, wind rustling the leaves, something in my chest finally loosening. Maybe the worst was over. Maybe now, the river could go back to just being a river. And maybe, just maybe, I could go back to dreaming without interruption. The night after that visit from the old man, something changed inside me. I stood on my half-built porch, arms crossed, listening to the frogs sing down by the water. For the first time in weeks, the fear was gone. Not because the fight was over, but because I realized I wasn't alone anymore. That one voice, soft, steady, honest, meant more than 100 letters or threats. It reminded me that truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand firm. The next morning, I woke early and walked straight to the river. I didn't bring tools. Just a folding chair and a cup of hot coffee. Mist floated across the surface like silk unraveling, and I just sat there, watching it drift. I had never felt so sure of anything in my life. The world could press in, pile up its rules and warnings, but here, on this patch of earth, by this stretch of river, I had carved out something real. Something honest. Later that week, I finally started painting the cabin walls. I chose a soft cedar brown, something that would blend into the trees. I didn't want it to stand out. I wanted it to belong. With every stroke of the brush, I felt more connected to the land. The rhythm calmed me. The sound of bristles against wood was like music. One afternoon, while I was working on the front trim, a small group of kids appeared on the trail. Maybe 8 or 9 years old, laughing and chasing each other. I froze for a second, half expecting another complaint, another scene. But instead, one of them waved. "Is this your cabin?" a girl asked, eyes wide. I nodded slowly. "It is." "It's so cool," she said. "We used to come down here to throw rocks in the river. But then our parents said not to anymore, 'cause someone got mad." I chuckled. "You can still throw rocks," I said, surprising myself. "Just maybe not near the dock I'm building." She grinned, and they ran off giggling. That moment stuck with me more than I expected. Maybe the river wasn't just mine. Maybe it could belong to everyone, as long as people respected it and respected me. I didn't want fences. I didn't want signs. I just wanted peace. So I kept building. I added a small fire pit, built shelves from reclaimed wood, hung a wind chime made from old keys and spoons that clinked softly in the breeze. And each night, I sat on my porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees, that golden light rippling across the water. The HOA never returned. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of wind and birdsong, and the quiet joy of something earned, not given. I had built more than a cabin. I had built home.